I'm Yasmin.
I'm Dolly.
I'm Chloe Gomery.
I'm Josh.
I'm Chloe Joseph, and this is our presentation. Most of the carbon emissions in the UK come from the transport sector, with private cars and buses being the main contributors. According to the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, the transport sector accounted for 25% of the nation's total carbon dioxide emissions in 2020. This figure is expected to increase in the future as vehicle use is set to rise. Despite the introduction of a variety of measures, carbon emissions from transportation in the UK increased from 1.3% between 2017 and 2018. This indicates that more needs to be done to reduce emissions from the transport sector. The environment is facing an unprecedented challenge due to the effects of transportation. As people are becoming more mobile and transportation is becoming more accessible, the impact of different forms of transportation is becoming more evident. The burning of fossil fuels in cars, airplanes, ships, trains is releasing large amounts of carbon dioxide and other toxic pollutants into the atmosphere. This may cause air pollution and climate change to worsen. Carbon dioxide emissions have steadily been increasing over the past few decades, and their effects on the environment have become evident. CO2 emissions also contribute to air pollution, which cause respiratory illnesses and reduces air quality. In addition, it increases acidification of the oceans, leading to the destruction of coral reefs and the deaths of sea creatures. It is clear that the effects of carbon emissions on the environment are severe and must be addressed in order to protect the planet for future generations. This presentation will talk about 3 different forms of transportation and their carbon emissions, the impact it has on the wildlife and the environment near the Essex Wildlife Trust sites, and recommendations that can help reduce carbon emissions caused by visitors.
So at the beginning of the task, we used a carbon calculator to calculate the distances from London, Cheltenham and Colchester to the 3 wildlife trust sites we were given. We used a few different carbon calculators to double check ourselves as well. We used it for a small petrol car and using the miles driven to get carbon emissions in tonnes. We then converted the tonnes to kilograms. For public transport, we worked out train and bus separately and then added it together. We then times it by 2 to get the distance there and back accounted for. And then for bike CO2 emissions, all bike emissions to the Wildlife Trust Centre is 0 kilograms, as they are man-powered. We don't want to ignore the fact that bike manufacturing does contribute to CO2 emissions. However, we've not included this in this task because we've not done that for public transport or car either.
Doing the calculation of CO2 emissions, we chose a small petrol car as no specific design was given. Doing the calculation process of the starting locations, no specified postcode was given, so we assumed everyone's travelling from a general city area. Doing the calculations, multiple calculators were used and calculated from kilometres to miles. As a difficulty, the calculations of public transport had to be worked on in different sections, as trains and buses produce different emissions.
So for the first site, we've got Fobbie Marsh Nature Reserve CO2 emissions from London, Cheltenham and Colchester. It was pretty obvious that small petrol cars were going to be a lot larger in the CO2. Colchester was the furthest away, 45 miles from the site, so naturally that was the longest. And this was equivalent to boiling a kettle 720 times, like the same CO2 emissions going out.
So we did the same for the other 2 sites, so for Gurning Bushes Nature Reserve and also for Great Holland Nature Reserve. But for both of these you can see that car is also the most polluting. On this one, London is the furthest away at 83 miles, and to drive there would produce the same amount of CO2 emissions as boiling the kettle 1,330 times. This was some of the impacts we found on carbon dioxide on wildlife trust sites. So on a global scale, CO2 is the main gas driving climate change, but that also can cause some issues a lot more locally. So warmer temperatures during the summer mean the risk of wildfires is increasing, especially during times of drought. And this is detrimental, especially in wooded areas, which were some of our sites. So habitats and forms of life in the area are struggling. It's a long-lasting effect too, because smoke and debris can cause illness in animals and make the area inhabitable. This little map here shows that last year in summer, Essex had an exceptional fire severity index due to the temperatures. And another impact is extreme weather events and shifts in seasonal patterns, which are affecting bees. Another impact is extreme weather events and shifts in seasonal patterns, meaning bees are struggling to adapt and survive. They can't synchronise with the flowering plants that they pollinate. Not only is this threat increasing for bees, but increased scarcity of these plants means more competition for the species that feed on them, likely lowering survival rates and therefore inducing a loss of biodiversity.
Right, recommendations for carbon reduction amid visitors to the Essex wildlife sites. So they could do their own shuttle buses to and from the sites to reduce people using their cars, using more economical transport, i.e. public transport, electric vehicles or bikes, more cycle lanes or routes to encourage people to use bikes. We could do car shares incentives for like free parking for a full car, saves people just bringing, a car per person. A car park off the site with cheaper parking prices to decrease the CO2 and encourage people to walk. Electric cars can have free parking. Speed limits near sites, so to reduce the speed limit will reduce the CO2. Reduce the traffic flow to reduce the CO2, and fitness schemes to encourage health and reducing your carbon footprint.